Great. So I'm going to get things started. I'm Justin Vaughan-Brown, Director of Product Marketing here at AppDynamics, and I'm pleased to welcome you to the second session in the Next Gen Software Stack track today. We had Steve there talking about automation and DevOps earlier, and it's a really great follow-on now here to have a fantastic story about the DevOps journey that Standard Bank are going to tell us about. Lenro Meyer and Andrew Kretschmer, who've presented this several times, but they've evolved the story as with DevOps and improving the quality and speed of your releases. The journey is never over. It's a journey, not a destination. So we have over 30 countries represented here at this event in terms of registration. So what better than having two great speakers here who've come all the way from South Africa. So please give them a warm welcome, Andrew and Lenro.
Afternoon. You all here? Well, thanks for attending this session. It's a journey we've been on for about 4 years, and it's really been, well, very rewarding and also very challenging at times. Just for some background, so I'm the Executive Head of Software Development at Standard Bank for Channel Systems. And we've been on this journey a while, and we've made a hell of a lot of mistakes along the way, but we've also got a few things right. So I've got an additional responsibility in the bank now of driving the software engineering practices actually across the whole of our IT department. We're about 6,000 people, a couple of thousand systems. So a complex journey, but for us to succeed on our digital journey, we believe getting our engineering practices is one of the things we as IT can contribute to the journey. So just a bit of background, these figures are more or less accurate. We operate in about 20 different countries. We're very old, well, not compared to some of the UK banks, but 154 years old. About 15 million retail customers, 44,000 staff. So, for the African continent, pretty big. We are the largest financial institution on the continent. We're very much, as I said, on a digitization journey. And I think when we started out, we thought we'll just keep that in the channel space. But of course, as you digitize and as you want to innovate and improve processes, we're actually dropping the concepts further down the stack. So we're looking at digitization right from system of record, getting all of that done properly, iterating with customers, making sure what we've built is right, and then almost having a fast follower strategy on the channel, because to get those complex legacy systems to do what you need to do is very difficult. So I think our strategy is probably similar to most people. It's a mobile-first, self-service type strategy. You can see from some of these numbers that generally, these are from our financial reports, transaction volumes on our channels are definitely on the increase, and it just becomes more and more critical that we do this properly. I'll tell you a little bit about how our journey started in a sec. One of the things we did do, though, is realize that software engineering is critical for us. And I was lucky enough to go to MIT about 2.5, 3 years ago. And they told us the story of this building. I'm not sure if anyone knows what this is, but it's called Building 20, also known as the Innovation Incubator and the Magical Incubator. And what happened in this building in World War II, there was a shortage of space at MIT. So they erected this temporary structure, which was meant to last for about 3 years or so. I think it lasted 55 years. What tended to happen here is because it was a derelict ruin, no management ever ventured in there. So like-minded people were left in there to collaborate. So people from linguistics departments, engineering departments, IT departments, pretty much gathered in this building. It was very open plan, very collaborative. If you needed to extend your office, you would kick down a wall. If you needed to run a cable, you'd just kick a hole in the wall. So incredible things came out of here. The Biosound Corporation, for example, came out of this building. There were 9 Nobel Prize winners that have worked through this building over time. And some of the technology innovations that helped the Allies win the war came out of this building. So an incredible building. So, we kind of took back from this that as managers, I'm one of them. I think my portfolio is 98.5% software engineers, and there's a few of us managers. We try to really keep out the way, take the admin and the pain away from our engineers and let them really focus on what they're good at. So I've got a little clip here of our first blue-green deployment. It was an idea that one of our teams on their own initiative came up with. I'm sure like all of you used to have weekend deployments where 50 people would come in, everyone would hack away, and eventually the challenge would be regarded as successful. everyone's burnt out. If you had to roll back, I don't even know how you would do it. So I'm sure this is a problem we're all familiar with. So this team came up, I'm sure a lot of you do this now, blue-green deployments. They came up with a way of having almost 2 sets of production infrastructure, your live active one, and then our pipelines would push into passive, and we could run beta programs or do whatever testing we wanted there. And when we were actually happy with how it was working, we could just flick a switch on our HA proxy, customers would get routed to a new stack, there'd be new features there without anyone knowing. So this little clip here, I think, speaks nicely to this building 20 concept. It was filmed on some guy's mobile phone. We got the business in to come push the button. You hear a few nervous engineers, but it was literally 3 or 4 people, not a team of 50. You knew that what you were releasing was good. You knew how to roll it back if you had to. So it was a game changer for us, and we're actually adopting blue-green deployments pretty much across our whole IT stack. So let's see if, there we go.
We'll enable it for you.
So the 2 lines there are the 2 active servers, the blue and the green, and you'll see in time that they switch onto 2 new servers.
You just have to click. Run plan.
You can see one guy had a hangover, there's a box of Disprin there.
Click it, yeah, it's fine. Yeah. Dun dun dun. It's building. Suspense is killing me. Okay, it's doing its thing. Oh, I see something changing in that graph, hey?
Yeah, it's like what's been the other way.
And we're done.
Cool.
Okay, so that was a fairly sizable internet banking release. As a result of that release, a couple of new features that suddenly the customer would see on their front end. They were none the wiser. If it really went pear-shaped, we could switch back to the previously active version. Nice low-risk way of doing work. And then we start pushing change to the other, which is now the passive side. When we're ready, we flick again, and so on and so forth. So that's the basic concept behind this. Just so a bit of background, our strategy is to have a single global digital app with a few companion apps. If you look at this, you'll see there is, on the left-hand side, a menu. Those are all different countries. I think we're up to about 11 countries now, so it's one code base, one deployment in the App Store. If you happen to have accounts in all those geographies, you could literally flick between them, and it would route you up into that country's core banking system. Sometimes our core banking systems are in countries, sometimes they're cloud, they're different technologies. So it's a bit of a mix. But for us, you know, when we first started, we built a tablet app for South Africa. Then we decided to take it to Namibia. We created a new team, hacked the app to death, got it live, and then suddenly affordability around maintaining that app became a problem. So if you had to do that for 19, 20, 21 countries, you'd have to have massive teams. So we made huge mistakes there. I think our first tablet app, we had 10,000 test cases. We had a defect density of about 5,000. We had a 6-week test cycle. We had to run it over and over and over. So a little 3-4 month project ended up taking us about 18 months. We got it in with a lot of pain, and then we went back to the drawing board. So the idea here would be a single code base connecting to different geographies. If you look at some of the products on here, you'll see there's credit card, there's loyalty, there's home loans. We've actually got insurance on there, share trading. So it actually spans about 6 or 7 business units and obviously multi-geography, which brought a whole new level of complexity. But we managed to rewrite from tablet, we went on to mobile, we got better, and we're still continuously getting better. So I think don't beat yourselves up if you get this wrong the first couple of times. We're probably still getting it wrong. It's an ongoing journey. Next thing that came along is I said, right, great, we've got this capability on mobile, we want it on web as well. So we're actually building a global web solution now. The concepts of the tiles are very important here. What we've kind of got is a platform, and then on that platform, different capabilities. So if you take insurance, for example, you'd actually want an insurance feature team that own their tile, they own their system of record, they own all their engineering, all their software practices, and they can release features when they want. Obviously on web, you can do it all the time. On mobile, you probably don't want a new app every 5 minutes, so you'd probably have a once-a-month release cycle. But the services layer, if you've got your proper versioning strategy in place, you can release those continuously as well. And I think this empowers teams then. So if they really take themselves seriously and do their work well, let's say we'll have a once a month release train. If the guy's stuff's not on it, he misses out, but not the end of the world, he gets it a month later. The guys that are really on top of their game will be able to ship new features at least on a monthly basis on mobile and potentially intraday on web. So just to try to give you some, I mean, that's the background. We've kind of adopted SAFe as a way of working. We've got feature teams within SAFe that understand their technology. So you'll have iOS developers in there, Android, Angular, Java, etc. So people who know their tech and people that know their domain. Okay. So you can see this is actually quite a cool slide. The green block on the left, we actually pulled a whole bunch of information out of our repo and put it into Elasticsearch. And here's a representation of what it looked like. So the first thing we built was that monolith. And then you can see we actually started adopting the model where different feature teams own their code base. And suddenly you can see which teams, you know, how frequently they're committing, how many domain services we have, and so on. So that pretty much just speaks to the journey that I've done, and it visually represents it. The next thing, so I said earlier that we're busy trying to take some of these practices across the group. We're going to have thousands of pipelines in the bank. If you think about it, if you're creating your infrastructure automatically, the people that release Linux to you have a pipeline. They need to have a way that they can get their binary, apply patches, do security scans, and make the operating system available for us to consume as we build an automated pipeline. I think the JBoss teams are the same problem, and obviously all the app teams. So what we're trying to do is just get a view of what are the, I mean, we really, in terms of taking this down the stack and highlighting what's going on, it's pretty much early days. So we kind of looked at what the things were that would be of interest to us for, let's say, every pipeline, but some it may not be applicable. And we'll work with the teams as we go. Some of these metrics might not make sense with certain technologies. But the idea would be that as we build a pipeline, we actually want to create a visual radiator that shows us some of these key things. So the frequency of commits of the code base, the quality of the code, the reliability of the environment, what the automated testing looks like, what their security looks like. So these are the couple of things that we're starting with. Okay, this is an MVP. We're going to get it out there. We will evolve it as we go. It will become more and more complex. But you know, a lot of this is about visibility and exposing where people are. It's not to beat people up, but it's to try and help us get this DevOps journey going. I'm sure you all know there's quite a bit of resistance to this kind of change, and the cultural side of it is really difficult. But there are certain things that we're going to need, especially as we digitize across the bank and across geographies, and if we want to get quicker and quicker at releasing. So here's a mock-up of what that dashboard will look like. We tried to be a bit smart about this, because if you had to ask every team, please push all this information to us, it would probably take you forever. Teams don't always listen. So we just did a few things here where we actually reached into our central tooling and started pulling the information out. You know, so we own the whole Atlassian suite, so we pull all the information out, we stick it into Elasticsearch, and out of there we can index the stuff and push it up into these dashboards. So I have a deadline of the end of the month to get 7 of these things up, so I hope the guys are not letting me down while I'm over here. That's kind of the next thing we're doing to get our engineering practices spread across the organization. And then there's just a few things here around looking at the test coverage in the portfolios. We've got some rules in our pipeline that the build will fail if the test coverage drops. So there's a couple of things that we've done to try and ensure that the teams start you know, really focusing on quality and taking ownership of what they build. The other trick with this whole lot is they actually have to support this stuff as well. So it's in the interests. Having the automated test is a prerequisite for us. You can't, you know, we used to have massive manual testing contracts, and we've actually chopped a whole bunch of that and gone very much in favor of test-driven development and automation. We're looking at test harnesses now as a first sort of pass that we can run those against our provider systems. So we're looking at different ways that we can do that and then go work with the different teams to get them to start embracing that way of working. So yeah, on the journey, as I say. And then there's a couple of other metrics we can pull out of here. So things like code coverage, code smells, bugs and vulnerabilities. We have one of these per team. So that's our card domain team. If you remember back to our app, there was a tile for the card. And then each team would kind of have a dashboard supporting them. Okay. And then lastly, I mean, one of our practices here is to kind of dev off trunk. So you'll see there's a few pull requests here. If a team needs a feature from another team, they can submit a pull request. The team itself would do the reviews of the code, make sure the tests and so are in place, and then they'd actually pull the code and it would go into their pipeline. I think that gives us a way of people owning, you know, if you build it, you kind of own it. Not really cool to own it if someone else is building it and you have no way of reviewing what the guys have built for you. So that's, again, another technique we kind of use in our software engineering practices as we kind of work on evolving and automating our pipelines. And I think we trying to, you know, if you take the capacity of a team, we're looking at maybe 40% building new features, 40% are dealing technical debt and refactoring, and then a good 20% on automating all the pipelines. Lenro will cover some of the monitoring and alerting and stuff we're working on, but all of that stuff becomes critical to us. It's not a case of 95% new features, and you end up painting yourself into a corner that actually becomes almost impossible to release new features. Another thing we need to get really good at now is creating test data. So if you're going to be building automated environments, how do you get test data into the thing? How can you integrate as easily as possible into these systems of record to validate that what you build is actually going to work in production? Okay, so this is almost just another point is on those automated pipelines, we actually bake in an AppDynamics agent, so it kind of gets done as part of the flow. And we do this in production and non-production. So Lenro's going to talk about some of the use cases where we've actually found great value for that. But I think a key thing for us is your prod and non-prod, you almost need to treat the same. You can't get into a CI/CD world if your non-prod environment's down all the time. And that's why everything for us needs to be automation. People don't have access to the boxes. It's all done through scripts. The agents and so on get put down. The pipeline itself feeds all those dashboards and radiators. And that's effectively the mission we're on now, up and down the whole software stack. Okay. Right.
How's it, guys? My name is Len. I'm the AppD champion in Standard Bank. Official role is a development manager. How many of you guys currently use AppDynamics? Okay, quite a fair bit. I'm going to start the story on when we went on a journey with AppDynamics, and I think probably some of you guys have had the same type of thing happening to you that starts you thinking around going to look for something to help you. And I'm going to take you guys back to 26 February 2015. Our mobile application went down early in the morning, and then the development team probably got summoned to the room around 10 o'clock in the morning. So if I go back, what used to happen those days is we got summoned to a crisis room, and then as we walked in, the production people looked at us and they said to us, "Well, can you please help us out and let us know what's wrong?" Now, when you walked in as a developer those days, you didn't have access to production because of governance. We're not allowed to log in. There were some tools in the environment, but you didn't have access to the tools because those were operational tools. And then everybody still looks at you and they say, "Well, what's going on, Mr. Developer?" So to cut a long story short, is in the end, I think we were struggling through the day. Eventually, we managed to convince them to give us access to the production environment. After getting back access to the production environment, we managed to trace a couple of things, but by around 11 o'clock the evening, they said they had to make a call. And the typical thing we do in Standard Bank back those days is we started backing out the last things that were put into production. So because it was a crisis, they backed out four changes at the same time, and then suddenly the application started working. Next day, we got summoned to our group CIO's office, and she asked us, "Well, what happened and what was the root cause?" Of course, with us backing out 4 changes at once and not knowing what it was, we couldn't say what the problem was. This didn't go down too well. I mean, that day, there was a lot of people that was not that impressed with me is because I said as well, I mean, until they stop treating devs as second-class citizens with regards to production, we're going to see the same thing happening again and again. As I left that meeting, I thought to myself as well, we can't leave this as it is. I mean, we need to do something. So we started on a journey to try and find something that's going to help us. So we had monitoring tools in the past. The problem with those monitoring tools were, like I said, they were used by the operational teams. The devs didn't have access. I guess if we, as devs, if they were asking for access, we probably could have gotten. But I mean, so those days we weren't DevOps, it was Dev and Ops. Other problem was is these tools were typically turned off because it was impacting production. And so we started saying, well, cool, let's have a look at the existing tool. I got access to the tool. Access, but not real access. I couldn't go and configure it myself and change things. And then after banging my head on the wall for a while, we started looking for what else is there in the market. And then as I started Googling, I mean, so back then, APM wasn't really a term that we were using in the bank. I started reading around modern APM tools, and then you get onto Relic, you get to Dynatrace, AppDynamics, and we considered these alternatives. In the end, we came up with a couple of criteria before we chose a product. The criteria that we were specifically looking after is we wanted to find a product that was always going to run in production, so something that is not going to be turned off. This product had to be easy to deploy and use. I personally didn't want to speak to a vendor, so ultimately I want something that I can take and implement myself and figure it out how it can work myself. It had to be a DevOps enabler. So DevOps enabler meaning is that my devs have access to the environment, my ops people's got access to the environment, and it helps the two teams to collaborate and work together. And then it's not just for dev and ops people, it's for everybody to use. I mean, it's for my business, it's for my testing community, it's for everybody. And then I guess from bringing the technical side of things is what was key for us is having a code drill down capability and also having the auto discovery with the flow maps being built and those types of things. In the end, we made a choice, and AppDynamics was our winner. And since we started on that journey, I think from May 2015 is probably when we put a stake in the ground and said AppDynamics is going to be it. It took me probably about 4 or 5 months to convince the organization that this is the right way to go. And I think we did our first purchase of AppDynamics agents that went into production that December, the end of the year. So I want to give you guys some use cases where AppDynamics has been a real use for Standard Bank. And I've broken it up into 3 categories. So the first category is where we're going to talk around where AppDynamics actually helps you before you get to production. So we, like Andrew was saying, is we've got an applications running across Africa. This specific scenario is our internet banking product that we were deploying in Nigeria. Now, we have teams sitting in South Africa writing the internet banking platform. We've got integrating into our core banking system in Nigeria with resources sitting inside Nigeria. And then we had support from resources sitting inside India. The problem in this scenario was that we had logins taking 30 seconds. Now, I mean, anybody where a login takes 30 seconds will walk away. And we just couldn't find, back those days, and we couldn't find what the problem was. It was just finger pointing everybody. It wasn't us, it wasn't the core banking system, it wasn't the integration layer. And I mean, I spoke to one of the developers, and he was saying he probably was spending about 4 hours a day between collecting logs, because out of our own systems, where they had to go to the WAS team to get logs out of there, they had to go contact the guys in Nigeria, get logs, and then after about 4 hours, you could probably pinpoint something. And then we made a call, and we said, well, okay, this is not working, and we were just starting with the AppDynamics journey. We said, well, let's just push it into the environment and see what we found. It took us probably a week to stand up a controller in Nigeria. Once the controller was up and running, getting the agents deployed was literally a couple of minutes. And from starting it up, and that same day that we deployed the agents, we could pinpoint exactly where the problem was. It was in a core banking system, and we could contact a vendor in India, and we can ask them, provide them the information, the stack trace with a piece of code that was causing the issue. A week later, they issued us a patch. We deployed the patch, and the login times went from 30 seconds to 3 seconds when you were logging in from South Africa. Then, a bit more closer to home in South Africa is our USSD application. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with USSD, and that's in essence where you've got the shortcodes that you use on a mobile phone. And that's a big market in South Africa is we've got a lot of low-income users that use this. And it took us, and there's a plethora of the reasons why it took so long, but this was pretty much a 2-year project as well, where we started with, and that was before we got to these principles Andrew was talking about. But it just took forever. And then finally at the end, when we had to implement this into production, we had major performance issues. Andrew, funny enough, has asked me at that stage as well, why don't we have AppDynamics in this environment? And we got it in there, and within a week, we pretty much sorted out most of the performance issues, and we managed to get it into production. Funny enough so we did do load testing, but the load testing they said we had to use were for 50 concurrent users. When we went into production, we were in production for 15 minutes, and we had to pull it out again because we just couldn't handle the load. CPU utilization was spiking, and the performance for the experience for my customers was terrible. So taking it out and putting the old system back in, we've realized that the load testing we were doing in our test environments were not nearly what was going to be in production. So with the AppDynamics being put into place, we took a couple of days to get our performance test team to simulate the amount of test data we required. And then as we started pushing the load in, after making 3 sets of, so what we did is we made some performance enhancements, pushed the load through, it would perform better, you'll get to a certain scale, and it'll fall over the cliff again. After making 3 sets of performance enhancements, we scaled our infrastructure up a little bit. We got the application back into production, and when it went back into production, there was no issues and it was working until today. That application is still running quite well in production. So those are 2 scenarios where it helps us to get code into production. Ultimately, I guess where AppDynamics really excels is, there's the 2 sides of things. It's how does it prevent outages? And then secondly is the triage process. This is a scenario where it is a mobile banking website, and we had a deployment one Sunday evening with our core banking system. And it was a major change, so all the channels had to be shut down. 4 o'clock the Monday morning, they started the applications up again. And then everybody thought everything was working well. I got into the office, and then AppDynamics started throwing alerts. And as we looked at the alerts, at first it was a bit obscure, but we picked up that the error rates were spiking on specific transactions when you were logging in. And after digging down, as we had a 4-node cluster servicing, providing banking capability to one of those tiles on the mobile application Andrew was showing. And we found 1 node out of the 4 that had in essence blown its connection pools, and it wasn't working properly. So what that translated to was that 25% of our customers logging in at that stage were experiencing timeouts. So in that scenario, is we could take the node out of the cluster, and the load balancing would go to 3, and the customer experience returned to normal. This is a scenario where it has helped us in production. So April 2016 as well, I remember quite clearly I was sitting in a room with our production people, and they said to me as well, are you guys aware that our internet banking website is down? I said to them as well, no, I wasn't aware. So I had my laptop with me, I opened my laptop up, logged into AppDynamics, and I could pinpoint exactly saying to them as well, it's our adaptive risk system at that stage that was timing out when you did a call before you were logging in. So at that, what we could do then was we could contact the team directly and say to them as well, can you please have a look at the application? They couldn't resolve the issue then. And luckily from the engineering practice that we implemented, we could feature toggle that adaptive risk call off for that period of time, get the application back up running again. When the adaptive risk system was working again, we could restore services to its full capability. Then the last example is where we can stop problems from happening. And this scenario is, again, AppDynamics trigger alerts. So we don't use analytics. We got our own logging into Elasticsearch where we get our business insights from. And the scenario is we pump all those events into a queue. And that queues were, in essence, filling up. We weren't consuming the data off the queue. And it was starting to impact the performance of the application. We could pinpoint which queue it was. We could get the guys to restart the queue manager, and we could get the messages processed, and services returned without any issues. I guess if you're asking me does AppDynamics stop these issues from happening completely? So we're quite a complex environment, so we've got a lot of Java, for example, our channels, but we've got a heavy reliance on some proprietary products in the integration layer, and also we've got a lot of mainframe. So also, again, about 5 weeks ago, our mobile application was down for quite, well, it wasn't down, it was degraded performance. But again, AppDynamics was the tool that alerted us at first that something was wrong, and we were the first team to say something was going on. We could pinpoint with confidence that it wasn't our application causing the issue. Eventually, we could see as remote services we depended on. And we could isolate and let the teams focus on which problem to fix without impacting us. And a really good thing was in those crisis rooms we could provide them real-time metrics to what was going on. We could throw a dashboard on the screen. We could show to them as well, these are the response times to these backend services. These are the error rates and those types of things. And ultimately, the third one is AppDynamics really enables feature teams to do dev and ops. We have adopted sometimes we don't know if we always do things right. We learn as we go along, as our feature teams do both develop and operations. And we find that AppDynamics plays a key role in that. So our devs now have visibility to run the errors that is in their dev environments, but also what is in the operational environments. We've got metrics our code is performing. So if you're talking about NFRs, you now have real metrics that you can show to teams around as well. This is how my services are performing if people are depending on those things. I even had some people, senior developers that once AppDynamics are in the environment, they suddenly see things that they didn't know their code was doing. AppDynamics got a very simple feature in the troubleshooting where you can go to exceptions. And I can't tell you how many times where we've pushed the agents in, and the first thing we have a look at, and then suddenly you find is that there's a bunch of null pointer exceptions in code that people weren't aware of. So just creating the visibility around what is going on and allowing your guys to actually take pride in what they do and improve the code all the time. And then, being able to pinpoint where issues are. If you guys are going to do dev and ops, then that certainly helps a lot with that. And ultimately, what we find is that with the guys having AppDynamics in the non-production environments, we've seen the code quality of improving, less errors in production, and better quality code going into production. So some of the things that we're doing to help our teams is, we've actually done some integration from AppDynamics into an application called Telegram. So we push all our alerts to Telegram, so allowing our teams, it doesn't matter where they are, whether it's at home or whether it's in the office, to get alerts. We've now created visibility for teams to what is going on the servers. So from a governance perspective, this really helps because they don't typically want our developers to log onto servers, but with AppDynamics installed on the servers, you can tell log files on the servers without having to log onto the server. You can see what your code is doing, and that's really ticks a box with our internal audit teams, for example. And then I guess a simple scenarios, I'm not sure if you guys ever had the pleasure of a certificate expiring in production. It has happened with us a couple of times. There's a cool little plugin for AppDynamics which you can deploy that gives you visibility to when a certificate expires. And we've started to bake these things into dashboards now as teams push code out in production, they need to actively show that they are monitoring when these certificates expire to prevent these type of things from happening. And then this is just a sample of a dashboard we built. And typically, as we've got lots of these dashboards up in our CTO room, he's got a real interest to what's going on in the applications. And we really find that this is a cool way to show to your management to what is going on in the applications. And I guess to follow up onto the theme of this talk is, so DevOps, and what does DevOps mean to Standard Bank? So, DevOps ultimately is to allow the various teams to collaborate. But we do this to get resilience into our teams. So ultimately, when I say resilience into our teams, is to get the various teams to work together. We get our testing teams actually shouting more sometimes because ultimately as we move our agents around between dev and our UAT environments, for example. So if it's not in the one environment where they're testing, they're probably the first team to shout to say, well, where's AppDynamics? Because they find it so useful for tracking where issues are. We use it to monitor our infrastructure and it just creates resilience in that software. Ultimately, is when we talk about visibility to our software and our infrastructure. So, yes, visibility to what's going on, but it's also creating transparency. I'm very keen for. It literally stops people from hiding stuff that they wouldn't want people to see. So, ultimately, is your devs can't hide stuff from your ops people can't hide stuff from your dev people, and you can see what's going on. Ultimately, we've got a slogan where we say, "You build it, you own it." And that's really starting to resonate with our staff. So if something falls over in production, we're not going to phone a pure operational person. The developer gets phoned, and typically they need to jump in and fix their code, and then use the pipelines we got in place to push code to production. Then the key thing that we started off, so the little video clip Andrew showed to you guys, is we had a project called Chop Chop when we started this journey. Because in the past, it took us about 6 months to provision new infrastructure. So we're down in South Africa, so cloud is AWS, and those things aren't really. So geographically, we're quite far from those providers. So we run a lot of stuff on premise, and it took 6 months to build a server. So as Chop Chop came on board, we adopted a protocol Chef, which we used to build to automate our infrastructure. Ultimately, as in the end, what used to take 6 months, we can now do in a couple of minutes. Culture, so we need to change people, and I make a statement that some people find quite odd. If you can't change the people, change the people. And that's something that we need to do. So this is, not everybody's going to accept it. Some people see, for example, automation as a threat, where they're going to lose their jobs. But ultimately, if you're going to automate, it allows you to focus on other things that is of more value. And then at the bottom, I guess is, some people, especially in our organization, say, well, that's not true. But DevOps doesn't mean it's just developers doing development and ops. DevOps is your developers and operational people working together. If you want your developers just to do both, then you need to get to know ops. And if you want to know ops, there's a whole bunch of other things you need to have in place. Then I want to share with you guys some tips and learnings from Standard and I think that touches on the previous slide, so automate as much as you can. So we've baked in so if you take even our controller, so we've got a chef recipe for deploying a controller. So if there's a new version of AppDynamics that comes out, we update the recipe, we run the recipe, and a new version of AppDynamics gets deployed. We've baked in the deployment of agents in all our recipes. So we've got a JBoss recipe, and you run the JBoss recipe, you'll have AppDynamics as part of your deployment. But the question would be as well, why automate? So ultimately, as we automate because we want to do these things repeatably, and we want to do it in a consistent fashion. So we always want to know that we're pushing the right agent down, and that stuff is always going to be there. And ultimately, machines are better at repetitive things, and then people can focus on where the real value add is. This is something really close to me. So, AppDynamics needs to be in the right people's hands. I think a lot of organizations have got tools teams. We've got a tools team. And if you get your tools team to go and deploy your agents and do everything on behalf of your various teams, what we found in our organization is that typically as they go in, they deploy the agents, they build a couple of dashboards, configure some health rules, and as they leave, nobody tends to use it. So we've adopted the principle as where, so I run the AppDynamics team in a bank, and we don't deploy any agents on anybody's behalf. So we'll go in bed with a team, we'll show them how an agent is deployed, they'll deploy the agents, they'll configure the health rules, they'll configure everything else. And by doing that, because they ultimately know the application best. So they'll configure what is there. And that way we've seen some real value. Then not everything comes for free. So ultimately, as I think AppDynamics does a really good job out of the box. It gives you some really cool things. But ultimately, as you need to put some thought into it. So the little picture down there is a picture of a mobile application, and we're busy restructuring those things because ultimately, those dashboards just gets insanely busy and hard to tell what's going on. And also, as I guess your other problem you get with that is that you run into business transaction limits where it starts grouping your business transactions together and then starts making things a bit difficult. And then I guess as a takeaway that I would like to leave with you guys is so whenever you do this, define the minimum criteria, and we want to. We're striving to take this forward. So as teams want to deploy code into production or build their pipelines, we say to them is they need to have these things defined. So if you're building a new API and there's a new business transaction, before you go into production, you need to be able to show to the governance teams that, yes, this business transaction exists in AppDynamics. If there's a new endpoint you depend on, yes, that endpoint is named in AppDynamics. And then ultimately, is there's a health rule defined, either a global health rule is going to monitor those business transactions, or for something specifically. Then the fourth thing is they've got some alerts set up. So ultimately, as a feature team, you take ownership of that piece of code that you're pushing out. And there's alerts that's going to come through. And then the last thing is there's a dashboard per feature team. So every team is creating visibility for other teams to what is going on. So you can see what is going on in those business transactions. And ultimately, is every feature team should be able to go to our CTO office and put a dashboard on the wall to show what's going on in the application. And that's the last thing I guys want to leave you guys with. Any questions?
Come on, there must be so many. So we have, I guess, quite a few existing AppDynamics users and also some potential ones in the room. We have two great speakers here who've got lots and lots of experience to share. So please, fire away. We have one. We have a winner here. Great. We just need a microphone. Thanks. You as well? Yeah. Okay, two. Okay, okay. Thanks. You're next.
Hello. It was a really good talk. So we're not using AppDynamics yet, but we are considering it. We've got a huge, we've got a lot of apps. So we've really bought into the micro application policies. We've taken monoliths, and we've now got hundreds of small apps. How do you handle it? Did you just add AppDynamics into everything, or did you start with a few key apps?
So when we started with a few key apps. So ultimately, as I think to what Andrew was saying is at the beginning, is we had a monolith. Nice thing about a monolith is you don't have to deploy that many AppD agents, which is awesome. But also, as the management around that is a pain in the behind. So we identified critical systems. So area that we represent typically as being the self-service channel, so our customer-facing areas, and we focus on deploying the applications there first. I mean, so if I was in your shoes, typically you probably have burning areas. And I would push it into those burning areas first, because that's probably when you're going to realize the most value first. One thing that I find with AppD is well, I think Nick is here somewhere. I mean, I'm calling my drug dealer, because AppDynamics is a bit like a drug. Once it's in, people want more of it, and that way AppDynamics makes a bit more money.
For once, I'm speechless.
I mean, one of the problems you have is by saying, let's put it on our customer-facing channels. Your customer-facing channel still gets impacted by the system of record. So we've forever been asked why our app's down. Meanwhile, 99% of the time, Kix is blown, or the database is down, or some backend's down. So maybe a good approach is to pick some high-value business services and start with those. You know, customer-facing high-value business services, and tackle it that way.
Wonderful. Next question.
Hi.
I think it's on.
Yeah, as a good presentation. I work for E.ON, and we've started implementing in January, so we're still quite early in that journey, really, and we're sort of biting stuff off. And like you say, people comes out, oh, we want it. And at some point you have to say, look, stop, because we need to digest what we've already implemented on. But where we're struggling is, I think we're quite similar to you, is we've got a lot of legacy applications. We've got a sort of self-serve and a mobile application that is quite good to implement on, but we've also got call center type operations where we've got call center staff dialing into a middle tier, talking to back end, lots of complications in the back end, hundreds of transactions. And we're struggling with the sort of number of first name transactions that we would like. How did you go about, you know, you put it on out of the box discovery, so it finds the first 200 transactions, everything else falls into other transactions. Yep. We're struggling with making that shift and saying, look, this stuff that it found first isn't particularly important. These are the important transactions. We need to get them out of the other transaction part and into first name transactions. That's quite an overhead for us to try and get that done. I just wondered how you manage with that.
Are you doing things from an operational perspective? Or?
We're not DevOps. We're looking to go to DevOps. Okay. Our current model is we have a sort of overall operational support team, and then we have work streams that sort of like DevOps without the dev bit. So we have operational operational work streams that support areas of functionality.
So you got ops doing dev and ops.
Yeah. And I completely agree that as we try and make that movement to DevOps, this tool will be fantastic in doing that and enabling that communication between the two sides. And I'm seeing the dev side of things. Andy here, my colleague, is from dev, and he's busy implementing dev, and they're biting his hand off to get access to it to see what they're doing. And they seem to understand it more than from the operational side of point of view. It's a bit harder for them to. I'm struggling to get some of those people to buy into it as much as the developers, because they sort of see it adding value to their ongoing job.
I mean, ultimately, so AppDynamics, I guess, is quite different to most of AppDynamics' other customers, whereas most people implement AppDynamics from an operational perspective. We approach it from a dev perspective because our developers,
we're doing it from both at the same time. We've got two controllers. One controller for operation or for production, and one for dev, and we sort of auto discover in operations, and we let the dev team sort of do a bit more manually so they can really understand what's going on and configure it.
Yeah. Well, one thing is you're going to find is it's going to take time to figure out what works best for you. I mean, so I take, for example, as the naming convention. So you got your application, your tiers, and your nodes. I mean, we had initially thought, well, we're going to have this one big application with all these tiers in there. You very quickly find out is that, especially in those scenarios, you just have too many business transactions and you start losing stuff. So what we now started doing is so as we got microservices, we're starting to split those out as separate applications. And then we say to the teams as well, not applications, so per feature team, they have an application. And then we go to the devs and we say to the devs, you define what the business transactions are that is important, because ultimately there's a collaboration between dev and ops around what you want to monitor. And they know the application best, they wrote it. So I mean, we really go to them to say to them, you need to define a business transaction that is important to monitor. Because I mean, you're going to find there's some business transactions that is of no value. I mean, they might be there, but you don't care about those. And then they'll let you know well, these are the key things I want. I mean, and it's like I say, it's a collaboration effort between dev and ops. I think the key thing there is to think you can do it separately is a bit counterintuitive.
So we ran like that for a while, where we had this small team busy trying to do the whole DevOps thing and the rest of the bank not. And I mean, it's just so difficult that eventually we decided we're going wholesale safe across the bank. We put a deadline down and drove it hard. And I think maybe that's something you guys need to start thinking about.
I think that is what we're doing. I think the plan is the end of the year we start moving over to a DevOps team, but that will be across everything. So.
Okay, I think we've got probably time maybe for one, possibly two more questions. If anyone else, just to the back, the gentleman there with the burgundy tie. Thanks.
Hi. Could you please describe in a few steps what you have to do to get the AppDynamics agent working in a microservice?
On a microservice, I think.
Something what you call service.
Microservice environment. Well, any environment. I mean, so ultimately I guess the most time you're going to spend is probably getting the controller stood up. But I mean, that's not that hard. I mean, so it's just getting some infrastructure and starting the controller. Getting the agent deployed is super simple. I mean, ultimately, there's two agents. There's a machine agent and the app agent. The machine agent runs as a standalone Java process. There's a little Java app. So you need Java on the server, whether that's a Linux server or Windows server. And then so the machine agent will just give you machine metrics, and that's a simple configuration. So as you put the machine agent down as a little config file, it gives you the address and essence of the controller. So as you start up that machine agent, and I mean, and there's a bit of config you have to do around what you want to name it, but that brings up the machine agent, and that's really quick. And then the app agent is essence, you put down a bit of binaries on the machine, and then you just add some JVM parameters. And as you start up your JVM, it finds the controller, and magic happens. Well, magic happens, but I mean, it's quite cool if you don't see that, if you haven't had this stuff, it suddenly is seeing these flow maps being rendered. Especially if you have got a bunch of components that you're instrumenting, and you'll be surprised where I've had operational people saying, well, holy shit, we didn't know that there was this many components involved in it. And like I say, is if you've got a technical team, I mean, the key thing is that I find is if you go to your guys that and that's where the DevOps teams really work well, is where they've got infrastructure people, ops people, dev people working together. So, and a lot of times they polyglots, so they can do both. So getting the controllers set up is quick, and then, like I say, as we found is that getting the machine agents and the app agents deployed is literally 5 minutes. And there's some learnings. I mean, we've made some errors where if you take older JVMs where your max perm gen is set too small, because I mean, AppDynamics ultimately is that binary needs to go into that perm gen. And if that's too small, as you can potentially cause impact on that environment where just garbage collects continuously.
Great.
That answer your question?
Time for very, very, oh, okay.
Yes, we are, yeah. So I mean, ultimately, that's our route we're going. So every machine we spool up now with the automation we got built in is there's an AppDynamics agent that goes down and it feed in. I mean, I guess the problem we had prior to 4.3 at least is managing those agents, because you'll be surprised that the people that likes it just gobbles up all the licenses. And then when you want to give it to somebody else, there's no more licenses to consume.
Okay, I think we're coming close to just one very quick question. Just the lady with the red T-shirt.
Hey, so you were talking about gobbling up license and stuff. Have you ever done the thing where you've deployed to a proportion of a cluster to get a reasonable overview, but not necessarily every node in that cluster?
We just asked Nick for a bigger discount.
Well, I mean, it's definitely the last question then. So it literally says no, we're overrunning by 10 seconds. Wow, saved by the bell.
You can. I mean, ultimately, and the nice thing about AppDynamics is, I mean, you can shift licenses around. I mean, so we always manage those licenses, and we find is that, I mean, it's going to cost money to buy more. But nice thing with AppDynamics is you can go and turn agents off. Somebody else can consume those agents. If you have to, in your scenarios, move between clusters potentially, or nodes in a cluster. But I mean, the value really comes in is if you can see the bigger picture of them together. But I mean, if you can't, then picking is quite easy.
So it won't be running on the one that's down, but it'll be running on all the other ones.
So we're kind of just over time now, everyone. But please give a big hand to Lenro and Andrew. Thanks very much indeed. Thanks.